2 night owl sessions and over 15 thematic breakout dinners will be held in more intimate settings around the city of Marrakesh for off-the-record, frank, and uninhibited discussions. South-South cooperation, the future of multilateralism. Thousands of applicants will join the conference after a 3-day tailor-made leadership and networking program. To know more, visit our dedicated website, atlanticdialogues.org. Under the high patronage of His Majesty King Mohammed VI, the Policy Center for the New South is organizing the 12th edition of the Atlantic Dialogues Conference, its annual high-level gathering of influential public and private sector leaders from around the Atlantic Basin, for open, candid, and informal discussions on cross-regional and cross-sectoral issues. Over 350 high-level participants will gather from more than 70 countries to delve into this year's theme, A More Assertive Atlantic, Its Meaning for the World. Same as every edition, the conference will allow for different session formats. Over 10 plenary sessions and 3 AD talks will be on the record, available for streaming on the Policy Center's website. 2 night owl sessions and over 15 thematic breakout dinners will be held in more intimate settings around the city of Marrakesh for off-the-record, frank, and uninhibited discussions. South-South cooperation, the future of multilateralism, international financial architecture, economic nationalism, democracy in crisis, technology for sustainable transition, BRICS and NATO enlargements, global governance, and education. Over 40 emerging leaders from across the Atlantic, selected from thousands of applicants, will join the conference after a 3-day tailor-made leadership and networking program. To know more, visit our dedicated website, atlanticdialogues.org. Under the high patronage of His Majesty King Mohammed VI, the Policy Center for the New South is organizing the 12th edition of the Atlantic Dialogues Conference, its annual high-level gathering of influential public and private sector leaders from around the Atlantic Basin, for open, candid, and informal discussions on cross-regional and cross-sectoral issues. Over 350 high-level participants will gather from more than 70 countries to delve into this year's theme, A More Assertive Atlantic, Its Meaning for the World. Same as every edition, the conference will allow for different session formats. Over 10 plenary sessions and 3 AD talks will be on the record, available for streaming on the Policy Center's website. 2 night owl sessions and over 15 thematic breakout dinners will be held in more intimate settings around the city of Marrakesh for off-the-record, frank,
Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. The first plenary session will now begin. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. The first plenary session will now begin.
There is a struggle to The world is going through an economic, democratic, identity, and climate crisis that is calling into question the very foundations of modern society. There is a struggle to uphold multilateralism in a climate of growing nationalism, protectionism, and rising great power competition. At the same time, the need for multilateral cooperation could not be greater for the effective mitigation of cross-border threats in the North and in the South Atlantic. In response to the numerous challenges facing contemporary multilateral organizations, many have called for large-scale change, yet few have articulated how any such reforms might be supported or implemented. As the multidimensional crisis leaves parts of the world more fragile and vulnerable, it also precipitates the need for a reformed multilateral system fit for purpose and able to address the challenges of the future. What are the main challenges of contemporary multilateralism? How can a new model of international cooperation help to achieve the multilateralism goals?
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage the moderator of the first plenary session, moderator, presenter and journalist Ali Aslan.
Thank you, everyone. Indeed, it's a great pleasure to be back here at the Atlantic Dialogues. Business as usual, one could argue, but of course, it isn't. Unfortunately, lots are happening. We live in tumultuous time. I don't have to tell you. Many of the things that are occupying our personal and professional lives will be brought up now during the very first plenary session titled The Future of Strategic Partnerships and Multilateralism. So within and throughout the next 75 minutes, we will try to dissect and examine many of the issues that are affecting us, that are moving us, and that are keeping us up at night, for lack of a better term. I couldn't have asked for four greater speakers to join me here up on stage and lend their expertise. First up, she is the former foreign minister of Spain. Currently, she sits on the corporate boards of several publicly traded energy-focused companies and is a member of the International Advisory Board of the OCP Group. And one thing that makes me very happy, she's a visiting professor at my alma mater, Georgetown University. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Ana Palacio. Ana, right here. Great to have you back at the Atlantic Dialogues.
Pleasure to see you.
Always, always. Next up, he is the executive chairman of the Newbridge Advisory, which advises corporate leaders on geopolitical and geopolitics and political risks. He's also non-executive director of BP. And many people probably know him from his former roles. He's a former chief of the British Secret Intelligence Service, MI6, a former UK ambassador to the UN and Egypt, and last but certainly not least, a former foreign policy advisor to Prime Minister Tony Blair. Quite a credential, quite a CV. John Soros, ladies and gentlemen. John, yes, please. Next up, she is a very prominent and accomplished French politician. She served as an advisor to French President Mitterrand. She was a delegate minister for European Affairs and, of course, the French Minister of Employment and Solidarity, as well as the former president of the Anna Lindh Foundation. Please welcome Elisabeth Guigou. Good to have you back, Elizabeth, last time we shared the stage was at the World Policy Conference in Abu Dhabi, now back at the Atlantic Dialogues. Yes, please, by all means. And last but certainly not least, the face and a name very, very familiar to this audience, to the Atlantic Dialogues. He is the military advisor to UN Secretary General Guterres, also former Chief of Staff of the Senegalese Air Forces and Senegalese Army. General Biram Diop. General, good to have you back.
Thank you. Pleasure to see you.
It's all yours. And let's dive right in. We have indeed a superb panel assembled here for what is undoubtedly a very engaging and important discussion. John, now, I looked this up, and this is interesting. According to the historian Yuval Noah Harari, of course, world best-selling author, he says the ability to cooperate was among the distinguishing factors that led to the survival of the human race. If that's a factor, then we're really in a deep mess, aren't we?
Well, I'm not sure I entirely share that gloomy assessment. I think there's a remarkable amount of cooperation going on in the world. We've just seen the conclusion of the COP28. There are many critics of the COP process. There are still remarkably some people who are skeptical about climate change as a whole. But I think we are gradually making progress in the right direction. It's not fast enough, but I think it's a good example of where we are cooperating. I think in Europe, we've seen a remarkable degree of cooperation within Europe and across the Atlantic in support of Ukraine after the fearful invasion by Russia, trying to suppress that country's independence and sovereignty. And I think in the area of cooperation on development, I think one of the remarkable achievements of the last 60 years since I was a child has been the way in which, when I was at school, 50% of the world population lived in absolute poverty. Now that number has gone down. It went right down to 7%. During COVID, it crept back up again a little bit. It's still a challenge. But to move the world from 50% of the population in absolute poverty down to single digits is a remarkable achievement, and it's there by cooperation. So I don't despair about our ability to cooperate. I think there are many areas that we're going to have to carry on focusing on. But the challenges, whether it's new technologies like artificial intelligence, the climate, as I say, resurgence of conflict that we've seen in Europe, in the Middle East, in Africa, I think there are many things we still have to tackle, but I'm not in the least bit despairing about the capacity of people and countries to cooperate with each other.
Striking a rather optimistic tone, saying progress has been made and it's not all as bad and bleak as it may appear at the moment. John, of course, something that I might challenge you going forward throughout the discussion. But Anna, let me bring you in here. I mean, the world, despite John's optimism, is going through a democratic, economic identity and climate crisis. International peace and security is under assault. One just has to look at Ukraine. One just has to look at the situation in Gaza. And we are seeing a climate of growing nationalism, protectionism, and rising great power competition, which all in all, one could argue, is undermining the very notion of multilateralism and is leading to fragmentation. You, of course, were in charge at the very highest level. You were foreign minister of your country. If you're looking at the current situation that the world is in and international relations are in, what comes to mind?
Well, maybe my experience in Brussels and my experience as a General Counsel of the World Bank, because what I would say is that honestly the world has changed and we have to interiorize that. To go beyond this, that is almost a truism, I agree with John, but behind this idea of cooperation, we have to see what was driving this cooperation. And frankly, all our multilateral system is built on a paradigm that is, the objective is peace. Peace is achieved through prosperity, through just development. This idea of bringing 50% of the population of the world from abject poverty to having only 7%, which is still too much, but yet. And the last connection was, and prosperity is brought by exchange, which means that this institutional framework, multilateral institutional framework, was created in this idea that you would focus on this kind of pacific or I mean, not conflictive cooperation. Today, what comes to the fore is that peace is about security. And frankly, not at all sure where is the connection with the exchanges. And this we see it in the European Union, the issues that we have. And we, in a more general way, we see it on how international law, international rules are evolving. And President Obasanjo and the former president of Ecuador were here discussing about this idea of rules, institutions, new institutions. So in my opinion, our first challenge to tackle all these crises that you have mentioned there is to understand how the world has changed and how the basis on which we cemented our cooperations, we have to review them.
The world certainly has changed, and with that, perhaps the institutions will have to change, something that we will get in. We're going to take a temperature here first amongst the four panelists before we dive a bit deeper, because Elizabeth, like Anna, of course, you were also part of government. You're a very experienced politician. You were a minister. You were in various functions of the French government and have seen the benefits of multilateralism throughout your career. How would you describe, if you were a doctor, what diagnosis would you give the patient at the current moment?
Well, of course I will answer your question. I think it's maybe we are on the most important subject this afternoon. But then I will speak French. So for those who need to have their ears. Alors, d'abord le multilatéralisme.
First, multilateralism, or rather the international order that was established under the auspices of the United States and all the winning powers, including the Soviet Union, is very much challenged by internal divisions and the evolution of the United States and Europe, of course. This being said, we also know that we are facing world challenges and global challenges here is climate, digital revolution, where we need multilateralism even more. So international cooperation is more than ever crucial. And now that we need this cooperation, we realize that the world is being fragmented, and there's a huge fragmentation. There is a growing trend to isolate, to return inwards in our own communities, and this is not where the solutions lie. So the solutions would only lie in cooperation. So through what level, through what strategic partnerships we're going to do this? We need to find the relevant spaces for these cooperation, and we need to find the relevant forging points and focal points. I share your optimism, John, by the way, because I believe here that we are inventing, surely, slowly but surely, the basis of a new multilateralism and new partnerships. What happened during COP28 earlier next week, we can say that it is an empty shell and a very modest progress. If we look at the global challenges ahead of us, yes, it is a modest progress, but it is a progress still under the pressure of non-governmental organizations. The COP president, when he wanted to close the COP28, that did not mention the objective by 2050 to move towards decarbonized economy, had to actually really given under the pressure of the non-governmental organizations. So there is a momentum here, and we need to come up with new methods and invite new methods. We can no longer have those disbalanced partnership between the North and the South. I can witness and see what's unfolding between Africa and Europe. And the South wants to make its voice heard. It's legitimate. Not only Africa and South wants to make its voice heard and take part of the decision-making process, and it's legitimate. And Europe not only should look towards the east. Of course, we have this war with Ukraine going on, and we need to take care of it because there are a lot of risks out there. But under the impulse of the southern Mediterranean countries, we need to offer another type of partnership to the countries of the South, much more balanced, on an equal footing, on a mutual benefit spirit, and with concrete and tangible solutions and approaches. And the initiatives taken by the King of Morocco on vertical cooperations and horizontal cooperations, we need to join both. But for the Atlantic, I think that concrete proposals as alternatives on development, on technology are more than welcome. So I see the glass half full, not half empty, rather.
Echoing what John was saying, that despite the difficulties, there is room and space for optimism. Yes, a much more different world order, a more inclusive world order is what you are appealing for in general. Ana Palacio said, of course, these days, peace is international order, and the peace of it is all about security, first and foremost. This is, of course, your daily bread and butter. That's where your expertise comes in. And indeed, if one were to talk about the war here on stage, one actually would have to clarify these days which one we're talking about, whether we're talking about Ukraine, whether we're talking about Gaza, or probably another conflict altogether. As a military advisor to the UN Secretary General, you must be concerned about the current state that we live in, aren't you?
Thank you very much. Let me, first of all, congratulate ourselves.
Already?
Yes, for what has taken place in Dubai.
Oh, I see.
Which is, for me, a milestone in multilateralism. What does it mean? It means that it can be very difficult, but it's never impossible. And when we have determination and we have the will to move forward, we can find the ways to move forward and get things done. So this is a motivating factor, but it should not generate lack of humility. We need to remain humble and work harder. Pave the way for more victories. And how can we guarantee that we can have more victories? In my opinion, first of all, since we are in a world of action, yes, but also in a world of explanation. Because people expect from those who are leading them to explain to them what they want to do on their behalf. So we need to continue to explain the value-added multilateralism can bring to the table. What are the gains we can generate with multilateralism? And also talk about the risk that go with autocracies, populism, nationalism, and extremes. It's about choosing between multilateralism, that is the least worst way of dealing with worldwide issues, and autocracies that have led us in the history to places where we did not want to be. And if we explain this to our general public, they can understand. it is also about investing in human beings, because multilateralism is conceptualized, is implemented by human beings. So the values that are embedded by human beings will definitely impact the quality of our multilateralism. And we tend to not take this into account enough. Investing in individuals by focusing on values, universal values of tolerance, of patience, of solidarity, of respect. It's with these values that those who will be responsible of promoting multiculturalism, multilateralism, will come with. And if they don't have it, we cannot expect from them. And we need, finally, to rely on all the platforms that are available to us to make sure that within these platforms, the explanation, the promotion that need to be done are done. I will probably come back later, if you give me a second chance, and talk about this very critical situation in which we are with all these crises going on throughout the world. But I wanted really to share these general considerations that set the umbrella, the framework within which we need to focus on this specific issue.
In general, I think very few, if any in this room, would disagree with your sincere assessment, or rather appeal for more multilateralism. But as any good UN diplomat, you have, of course, evaded my question, which at the end of the day was about a world that we live in where countries are now forcefully trying to change borders through military means. And as a military advisor to the UN Secretary General, that I'm sure is giving you cause for trouble. I give you 60 seconds.
Yes, and it is a very regrettable situation in which we are. Talking about the situation taking place between Russia and Ukraine, for example, whereby we are not even able to have a mandate. And this brings us to the critical issue of mandate. Mandates are being voted by the Security Council. We have the P5, permanent members, and the elected 10. The P5 members, they have the veto power. Unfortunately, one of them is a belligerent. So whatever resolution or mandate you want to vote will be vetoed. So here we are in a very critical situation in the world, a war that is affecting all the continents of this world, and our collective good, which is our institution, is not able to even have a mandate. So we need to start thinking of what type of Security Council, what type of mechanism to take decisions should be put in place that is adapted to the complexities of today. So this is something for sure we need to work on. And sometimes, because of political divisions and divergence of interests, we're having so big difficulties to agree on a mandate. We negotiate so badly on each word that when we agree, yes, everybody is satisfied, but the mandate does not reflect the realities we want to deal with on the ground.
And indeed, the history, of course, Anna, of the UN Security Council in particular, paralyzing itself for years is well documented, something that the General has rightfully pointed out. And many people, the UN, of course, is, for lack of a better sense, the epitome, if you will, of a multilateral institution, the most prominent that we have, the one that rose from the ashes of World War II. And indeed, there are more and more voices out there that says, yes, but the architecture of the UN and UN Security Council, for that matter, is undemocratic. It is a product and reflection of the 20th century, not of the 21st century. We need to rethink it. We need to reform it. We need to make it more inclusive. Nothing that's new to you or anyone here in the audience. This debate's been going on. But of course, getting there is always the issue, isn't it?
Well, first count me on the reasonably optimistic among them. I am. And I am because, you know, nature abhors vacuum. And yes, there is a certain paralysis of the Security Council, and we have seen other cooperations. But cooperations, and this is what the structures, what institutions are consolidating rules, consolidated rules. And what we see today is that the rules are morphing to respond to these demands. And the agreement in COP is a good example. In the production, Elizabeth has highlighted that what's presented by the presidency was not accepted, and there were actors that are social actors. And it is true, there is, as General Diop said, there is a willingness to have explanations, to participate. Not just the South, the young, I mean, everybody saw the production. And we have seen it in COP. It's a very good example. But also the implementation. The implementation now is based on what? Even the execution. Today we have an execution that is more blaming, shaming, convincing than anything else. So we have to see how this new world evolves. And instead of saying, oh, I am a lawyer, a classic lawyer, I miss international public law, the way it was, and resolution of the Security Council. But we have to understand that this is a new world. I wouldn't say, I think it was Elizabeth that said that these institutions were created after World War II. I think that what is fundamental in these institutions is the spirit. And the spirit, I insist, is Atlantic Declaration. Again, Atlantic.
But the spirit is being violated over and over again.
No, it's not. I think that, it's the Atlantic Charter. It's this idea that peace is the objective, and you get there through exchanges. And you need an atmosphere or an environment. Today we are, you're right. The example is this changing frontiers just by way of force. This is what was tried to avoid in San Francisco, and I would say that this is the spirit of cooperation, of solving conflicts through negotiation, through peaceful means that inspire. And the best example is the European construction. This is the most achieved example of this world. Now we have to understand that we are in a different picture and revamp the institutions.
That's a billion-dollar question,
honestly,
isn't it? How?
Honestly, I wouldn't start by the Security Council. I would start by something easier, which is the World Bank. The Bretton Woods institutions, where when I was General Counsel there, and I was sitting around this table, I would see 5 or 6 European faces and just one African. That doesn't make sense in the world of today. In Bretton Woods, many of these countries were still colonies, so it's a different world. We have to understand that, and I would highlight that, of course, no, it's not the South wants. There is no dialogue without the South. And this is one of the visionary perspectives of the Atlantic dialogues, is that when few people saw that the Atlantic was not about United States or Europe, it was about the basin and about cooperation between Latin America and Africa.
But all what you say, of course, is true. But John, you were a UK ambassador to the UN. You know the institution very well. All of what we're talking about here, the need for reform, is anything but new. It exists, but yet we're still stuck in the system because, of course, first and foremost, the 5 Security Council members, of course, have no incentive to change it. And with all due respect to UK and France, I think in the 21st century, it'd be hard to argue if these countries would and should be part of what is now called the UN Security Council. You're a smart man. Give us a recipe on how to reform the UN Security Council.
Well, first of all, I think we need to be realistic about the United Nations and the Security Council. Its predecessor, the League of Nations, failed because the major powers, particularly the United States and the Soviet Union, were not brought into that process. And the only way they could be brought into the United Nations after 1945 was by ensuring that this international body was not going to act against their interests. And actually, from the founding of the Security Council after 1945 through until the end of the Cold War, the UN Security Council did very little. And it was only in that sort of halcyon period between the collapse of the Berlin Wall through until the Russian invasion of Georgia in 2008 that the Security Council was effective. It was a pretty short period, actually. And we've gone back to that period where the Security Council is stuck. I favor the reform of the Security Council. I think countries like India and Japan should be brought into the Security Council and to broaden it. Actually, you criticize French and British presence there, but we tend to be the glue that makes the Security Council work. To the extent the Security Council work is...
I did not criticize, I questioned.
No, I understand that. But you do need some soft power within that, and that tends to come from Britain and France as the people who try and forge a consensus within the Security Council. My concern with Biram, our military colleague, is that you can reach decisions by majority vote, as the General Assembly did against Russia's invasion of Ukraine. It didn't stop Russia's invasion. The United States and Israel have been outvoted in the General Assembly about the fighting in Gaza, calling for a ceasefire. It didn't create a ceasefire in Gaza. It made people feel better that they exercised those votes. But what is essential in our multilateral system is that there is some traction between decisions taken and what happens on the ground. So we shouldn't delude ourselves that simply by reforming and creating a more sort of open, plural system where veto-wielding members can be outvoted, that it's going to make a difference to the world. It won't. It will simply weaken and marginalize the institution.
Elizabeth, this is not to dwell on the United Nations by any means, because we can go down the list. The WTO is obviously in crisis. The World Bank, Anna has pointed it out. The G20, for all we know, and for all we've observed, isn't really living up to its task. In a world where many countries are turning their back on international rules and organization in favor of unilateral action, what is the solution here? I mean, we live in a world of close to 200 countries. Everybody is trying to voice. We have the BRICS states. We have the global south rising shortly, and rightly so, was confident, looking for a right and sizable place in the world. We need to rethink international relations, multilateralism, don't we, in the 21st century? And it might have to start with the countries that have ruled, for lack of a better term, the previous century.
Oui, bien sûr qu'il faut repenser.
Absolutely, we do need to think about these countries, but I truly believe that if the United Nations, if the G20, if the G8, G7 now, since we've kicked out Russia, and since, if all of these institutions didn't exist, well, we would have to invent them, because this is a forum, at least, where we are able to discuss what the common concerns are. We tend to talk about the UN Security Council quite extensively, but the General Assembly also takes positions and often, as mentioned by my neighbor here, do have an influence. So I don't believe that these organizations should be denigrated, but in this situation, the best that we can do, I believe, is to favor new partnerships. And I believe that the South-North or North-South partnerships must be explored a lot more. But in order for these partnerships to be balanced, well, this needs to happen between large regions, because when this tends to happen, as it's the case today, between the European Union, for instance, and individual African countries, because let's be honest here, even if there has been progress, well, with the African Union isn't able today to negotiate with the EU on equal footing, but it is not as integrated as the European Union. So consequently, there are discussions that are highly unbalanced, that on the South, well, in the South does generate some resentment, but we should not stay stuck in this resentment. We need to create something else, and I think that there is a joint responsibility from Europeans and Africans to develop this regional partnership, because I can very well see that between both Americas, there's quite a lot that's happening. New partnerships are being forged, new institutions are being created, new treaties are being signed. Actually, even new financial institutions are being created because investments need to obviously be generated. And there also needs to be financial engineering because all states are poor. And these international institutions are also poor because the states are no longer able to fund them. So with the private sector, we need to think about new means and methods to finance all of this. But we have a vertical region between the Americas. We have something that is being constructed in Asia under the impetus of China mainly. Yes, so let's agree with the rivalry between China and India. That's also true, but something that is being constructed on what basis? It is being constructed on the basis of three factors. First, there's tends to be a preference for proximity because geography does count, history counts, the shared language, a common culture also counts. So proximity, climate, global warming also bears more weight to this requirement of proximity because value chains are recomposed. Second, this is also based on complementarity between the North and the South. No need to spell it out for you. There are some complementarities that should be tapped into much more. And finally, this is where we can find new forms of solidarity, because we cannot develop partnerships that are based on selfishness, especially mutual selfishness. I'm not fundamentally, hopeless. It's true that this isn't, things aren't what they used to be, but the world is changing. It is what it is. And so we especially should question ourselves and challenge ourselves rather than staying stuck in this nihilism and wonder what we can construct that is more actual. There are bases for this, and there is a willingness to do so. And it's very interesting that we can discuss it all here together.
Discussion is not meant to invoke hopelessness by any sort of stretch of the imagination. Quite on the contrary, we do want to actually rejuvenate the discussion, instill life in it. And Biram, General, you are, of course, part of the United Nations, and many of the things has been said, a lot has been said here on stage about the institution that you serve. I want to give you a chance to respond directly. And give me your opinion about where, if at all, you would like the institution that you work for see some change.
I would like, first of all, to recognize that the UN is not perfect, will never be, but we thank God we have the UN. The UN is doing a lot, and we make the mistake to focus too much on where we are not delivering the way we would like to deliver. In the humanitarian aid, the UN is doing a lot. In the promotion of human rights, UN is doing a lot. In development with UNDP and so on. So let's be fair with all these other components of the United Nations that are doing a lot for the populations. And unfortunately, they are not very well known. So we need to invest more in making the United Nations known.
So it's a PR problem.
Yes. And it's not only our problem, it is also the problem of those who are our bosses, the member states, because we work on their behalf. It is also the problem of the citizens, because we are more and more citizens of the world. So we have individual responsibilities also to assume, to make sure that the institution that is working on our behalf is the best institution possible, even if we need to remain humble and knowing that it will never be perfect. Member states have to continue to negotiate because working together requires negotiations, requires compromises, requires patience, and member states need to do that. But also all the other relevant stakeholders of our societies need to be involved. I'm thinking of the civil societies organizations. I'm thinking of youth associations, women associations. They have a lot to do to contribute. And even if it is difficult today to see concrete changes, particularly at the level of the Security Council, I am sure that if we all mobilize our energies and we put synergy in our efforts, we can sooner or later find a breakthrough and get things changed for sure. I have no doubt about that. And the United Nations has also to be the United Nations of the people. It is very often too far away from the general public, which creates a lot of problems. There is a désamour between the UN and the citizens because they have expectations that are so big. Unfortunately, the UN cannot meet. So these expectation gaps are creating a lot of frustration and a big désamour from the citizens. We can also work on now by communicating better. Once again, I would like to highlight the necessity in this world of today to acknowledge that we owe people explanations all the time. Thank you.
Thank you, General. I think I think very few, if any, disagreements with what you said. I think that the United Nations is delivering on many fronts, I think, is undisputed. It has gotten Nobel Peace Prize, of course, for its work with the World Food Program, and so on and so forth. But synergies, efforts, Anna, you just came back from COP. You were just in Dubai. It has the agreement that was struck in Dubai has been mentioned a couple of times here on stage as a good example of multilateralism, of cooperation. But let's have a quick look. I mean, it is true that the agreement has for the first time taken explicit aim at the use of fossil fuels. The agreement, many people agree, signals the beginning of the end of the fossil fuel era. Nations have agreed to transition away from coal, oil, and gas. But you know that a lot of the smaller countries, in particular small islands hit hard by climate change, have said that the deal was rushed through without them. They were not consulted. So in many ways, despite certainly the groundbreaking result that this agreement has provided and produced, you could argue once again, it's not everyone was hurt in the process.
Well, you know, it's not easy to have 100,000 accreditations. It's not easy. I mean, I was wearing a watch that counts the steps, and one of the days I walked 26,000 steps within the green zone, the blue zone, because there was a foisonnement. There were goal. I mean, twice.
At least one goal was reached.
Yeah. So, I mean, my take from, and I don't want to be a provocateur, but the importance of this COP that is reflected in this declaration of just our goal is to get rid of fossil fuels. The importance is what is underneath, is that for the first time we had a dialogue that incorporated 80% of the sources, because 80% of the sources now are fossil fuels, and you don't go from 80% to zero like that, clicking. We in Europe, Spain has bet on renewables, Morocco has bet on renewables, but main countries like, I don't know, Pakistan or China. China is doing a lot of renewables, but of course, doing a lot of coal, and Pakistan. So, for me, the first thing that was what that is important, is reflected there, is that it was open. It was not the ideological, allow me, the ideological bubble of green at any cost was punctured. We have to remember that COP in the end started as a dialogue of a few experts on climate change that were trying to bring the attention of the world to the fact that the world was getting warmer, that the median temperature. And from that COP, by the way, who was the president? A young minister, German minister for environment called Angela Merkel. What we have today, and I think this was a breakthrough in this COP, is that for the first time you had all the stakeholders, all the people involved around the table. And by the way, nobody highlights that, but the Declaration on Nuclear is fundamental. It's the first time that a COP mentions nuclear. And we know we are against what, or what's our goal, is fighting fighting the CO2 and other greenhouse gases. We cannot, the awareness that nuclear is not a solution, but that there is no solution without nuclear is something healthy. Why do I mention these two things? Because if we really mean, and I fully agree that there is a distance, John, that's the problem between what we say and what we do. I think that we have started going from this preaching that was the aim. Glasgow was a very good example I was on a panel, and the criticism to Sultan Al-Jaber, who I think did a fantastic job, bringing firmness with humility. But someone said, you want to put the fox in charge of the hen house. No, it's not the fox. It's that we need to get all the needed interlocutors to find a way out of this situation. My last comment, and what was the other breakthrough for me in this COP, is that for the first time, the development dialogue and the environment and the climate change dialogue were not completely, isolated. There was a commonality. You have to have to combat climate change, but without forgetting that there is the development, that there are 700 million in Africa that do not have access to electricity, and that we cannot, as Europeans, go to Mozambique, and I finish with this, go to Mozambique, buy their gas, but tell them that no multilateral, no agency, European agency, will collaborate with them in having gas sourced electricity. This is part of this dialogue that we have to arrange, and that I think that it was.
No, thank you for your assessment. You were obviously there. John, I was wondering, because again, COP21, the agreement has been brought up on this panel as a positive sign and a positive example of what strategic partnerships and multilateralism can actually do and accomplish. Do you agree? You agree with the jubilant tone?
Well, I wouldn't be jubilant. I think it's a step forward. And Ali, you were asking us earlier, you had a rather skeptical tone about the state of the world. And I think we do have to be realistic. We have to recognize that, as Elizabeth says, the glass is half full, but half of it isn't there. And the half that isn't there, which has worsened in the last 2 years, is international security. We are seeing the 2-year war so far, probably going to stretch into 3 and possibly even 4 years between Russia after its invasion of Ukraine. We're seeing the terrible events in Israel and Gaza, the most horrific assault by Hamas against innocent civilians in the south of Israel, and a brutal, ruthless Israeli response with all the suffering that we're seeing in civilians in Gaza. And there's equal suffering, but without the media present, in places like Sudan, civil war being stoked by outside powers. We're seeing it in Ethiopia, where a government that came in, welcomed initially, turned against its own citizens. We're seeing problems in the DRC across the Sahel. And I think where the world has taken a turn for the worse in the last 2 years is that sense of a growing stability, a growing ability to address problems through negotiation and through civil means has fallen away. And I think that's the area where I would ring an alarm bell, because it is very worrying to see how we can find a way through here. None of these problems are new. We could have predicted 20 years ago that Ukraine and Russia would go different ways and that Russia would not like that. We've known for 60 years, 70 years that Israel and the Palestinians could not just coexist without some just settlement for the Palestinian people. And we've seen tensions across Africa as well, and the rise of extremist groups threatening government stability, and the lack of transitions from one generation to another in countries in Africa has been a problem, and continues a problem. So that is my biggest area of concern. There's no silver bullet here. Israel and Palestine will only make peace with one another when the two parties actually agree with one another, sit round a table and agree. And likewise, ultimately, there will probably be a negotiated solution finally to the terrible war in Ukraine, but we're not ready for it yet. The two parties are not ready for it yet. But I think we do need to be realistic. I was saying earlier, we have to be realistic about the role of international institutions, but we also have to be very focused on the need to address these wars that are breaking out and the conflicts that we've been failing to resolve. And I'm not sure it's going to be made any easier if the US election next year brings Donald Trump back into the White House.
Yeah, indeed, indeed. And Francis Fukuyama's end of history certainly and sadly in this particular instance did not turn out to be right. The many instances that you have pointed towards clash conflicts that we're seeing.
Well, the essence of the end of history was that society was moving in the direction of free market economies and liberal democracies. And I think what we've seen, especially since the year 2000, is that this has been in reverse, and since 2000, the spread of democracy has been slowed and stopped, and since 2012 or that sort of era, the spread of free market economies has gone into reverse, especially in the last 5 years or so. Now, I think we need to hang on to these precious values. For all the faults of democracy, it's a much better system than any other that's ever been invented. And we're seeing countries like China and Vietnam and other one-party states. Iran is another example of one-party states where there is no freedom for the individual, that eventually, especially if an economy is growing, as in China, people are not willing to invest in that country unless they have some personal freedom as well. And so what the Western model of democracy provides is checks and balances within the system, institutions that can control the power of individuals. And however failing that sometimes is, it's much better than single party or single individuals dominating a system. And I think the world will be a safer place if, as many countries on the African continent have done, they move gradually down the road to more plural systems, more accountable systems, more rule of law, which are much more important in many ways for a successful society than simply the process of voting.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure this discussion that we've followed now for the better part of the last hour has provoked a lot of food for thought. We have approximately 20 minutes left. I want to bring you in. I want to bring you in if you have questions and comments. I think now would be a good time, because I can imagine there'll be quite a number of them. So I'm already seeing quite a lot of hands up here. So my suggestion would be perhaps we'll collect 3 at first. And then hopefully, if time allows, we'll go for the second round. So let's get started. Please pass on the mic. I have... don't fight for it.
Thank you. Dennis Ferretia with Kafo Policy Institute in Cameroon. Now, I think the conversation has been very interesting, and the challenges that we face, I know most of you have been very, optimistic in your assessment of where we are. But I would reckon that what we see on the ground is that there is no world leadership. And the main thing is that the Security Council doesn't work, hasn't worked for a very long time, and it can be reformed, but we do not think that the P5 should exist. Obviously, France, Germany, Russia also cannot reform themselves. What happens when Venezuela invades Guyana? If we cannot fix ourselves, we cannot continue to anticipate conflicts and say that we are going to find different solutions from it. The Russian example is one that we must take that into consideration and figure out how that system, the very top, that is what makes the world go around. Whether we like it or not, that's what, if America vetoes anything, it stops. So we can try to reform the World Bank and the IMF. Yes, it is good, but in the grand scheme of things, it's a drop in the bucket. So P5 needs to be reformed. First thing, let them be there, but let them not be permanent members who veto.
All right, thank you. Please take notes if you can, because I'm going to try to get in as many questions and comments as possible. Gentlemen, please go ahead right here, and then the young lady there. No, we already have the microphone. The young lady right there in the row, and then I'm going to come to the gentleman. I'm going to bring you all in. Don't worry. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm Jorge Castañeda from Mexico, and for John, also for Anna, my friend and colleague.
You can say your former title, we know.
But be careful what you wish for. If the Addis Ababa Declaration on Security Council reform from around 2003, 2004 had been successful, and the P4 had entered Germany, Japan, Brazil, and India, last year, 2022, we would have had Bolsonaro and Modi in the Security Council. You really want that?
I'll be happy to hear the answer to that. Go ahead.
I'll go for, hello. I'll go for a softer question on the panel. I find it very interesting. My name is Khadija. I come from Belgium, and I find it very interesting the very fact that we are merging strategic partnerships with basically conflict and world peace. So I'm going to be a bit of an idealist here. What are the conditions in which we can see the future of partnerships as a guarantee to absolute world peace? Any one of you can answer. Thank you.
All right.
And thank you for your smile, Sir John. I see it.
Thank you. Go ahead, please. Seth, I'm going to come to you afterwards. Go ahead.
My name is Zahid, ambassador, former ambassador, and I have been in the multilateral field for many decades. And from my experience, I want to ask a question, then I will explain why. My question is the problem of multilateralism caused by the problem of the distribution of power between states and also the problem of interests? Because the power is, you know how it is distributed between states, even the creation and establishment of different international organizations is the result of this distribution of power. Security Council is a reflection of that. IMF, World Bank, and all the organizations, maybe except the World Trade Organization, where the developing countries played a very important role. How can we reconcile the problem of the distribution of power and the problem of interests? And when we say interests, of course, you have first security for some, but for others it's development. Which one comes first? We don't know. Of course, there are other interests. And now the reform, yes, we need some kind of reform, but I can tell you that the Charter of UN has been established so that it is impossible without the P5.
Thank you,
Thank
sir.
you.
Thank you so much. We're going from left to right and back and forth. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. Hello. Hi. Thank you very much for your presentation. I'm Tiago from the UN Food Program and also as part of the ADEO program this year. I think we can all agree that on the progress of multilateralism tackling some of our most pressing challenges. You mentioned climate change, poverty alleviation, questions of security as well. But at the same time, I agree, and I think a part of my generation also agrees that unfortunately progress has been very slow, and unfortunately we don't have the necessary time. So how can we make sure that this reform of multilateral institutions are done in a faster way, more effective way, and throughout this process that also unheard voices and voices of the most vulnerable communities are also heard, because that's not what we're seeing nowadays. But thank you.
All right, thank you so much. Going to this side again, coming back to you.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm Seth Stoddard. I'm from the United States. And I guess in listening to this conversation, I'm reminded a little bit, I mean, certainly the role of the United Nations has been very important in humanitarian relief and all various other things. But I guess in the realm of global security, I'm reminded of Henry Kissinger's famous comment of, you know, wanting to call Europe, what's the phone number for Europe again? And I think that's the problem, I think, in some ways with multilateral institutions right now. And to me, I think the fundamental problem that's facing the world in global security, I think it's the crisis of confidence in the United States, actually, around the world, and also the crisis of confidence inside the United States because of the divisions in the US. So I think, I mean, I was just in Taiwan a couple weeks ago in a conference there, very much skepticism about whether the United States really will come to the defense of Taiwan. Skepticism, certainly legitimate skepticism in Ukraine as to whether, looking at what's happening in the US Congress and the potential election of Donald Trump again next year. It seems to me that's the fundamental at the core right now of the dangers of global stability and the undermining of the cohesion of the US and the West because of social media, because of migration and populist backlash, and things like that that are throwing the countries of the West, and the US in particular, into nationalists pulling back the walls. And I guess that's the question to you all, is how do you deal with making progress in these areas where the great powers of the world are essentially pulling back behind their walls, and conceivably, and I think of it as a father, it's the first time in my life I've thought, I'm actually frightened for the future of my kids right now, in the sense of, because of, if the US is pulling back from the world, are we unleashing nuclear proliferation? Are we unleashing AI and an inability to govern the things that will dictate their security?
And that's a sentiment I'm sure many here in this room, at least those with kids, do share. Go ahead on this side again. I'm going to come back. I have the gentleman in the back, and you haven't forgotten.
Thank you. My name is Halima, and I'm a researcher. And as an academic and a researcher, I really find it a bit hard to share the panel's optimism, or responsible optimism, judging from how bleak the situation is, how uncertain the future is, how everybody, or at least many people, are second-guessing the validity and the universality of the values that Mr. General kindly mentioned. Now, Ms. Palacio mentioned that we are in an age of revamp. In the spirit of that revamp, and I may be stating the obvious, but can't we start by accepting that any partnership, any multilateralism that will work is one that is between equals? Thank you.
Thank you. Let's take a few more. If you haven't raised your hand by now, please don't raise it now, because I'm trying to do justice. No, exactly. I'm trying to do justice by those who've had their hands up for quite some time. So please, let's be fair. Go ahead, gentlemen. I'm going to come to you, the gentleman in the first row, and I have a couple more hands there, and then I'm going to throw it back for the remainder of the panel. Go ahead.
Thank you. Lawi Jala is my name, from Nigeria. I like the discourse that said the basis of cooperation for peace was because of prosperity. And I like that discussion. And now we're dealing with peace for security. Is it not the failure of capitalism that has led to inequality and increased poverty that is causing this problem? Should we be looking at ensuring that we carry people along? Maybe that will solve our problem. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Go ahead, please.
Yes. Okay, Senen Flores from Spain. And by the way, former ambassador of Spain to the United Nations in Vienna and the organizations in Vienna. I liked many of the things that have been said, especially the things that have been done and the part of the glaze that's full, knowing that we still have many things to do. because things are not as simple. If there was no veto power at the Security Council, quite simply, the United Nations would have disappeared and passed away many decades ago. That's the reality. And we have to face the reality if we want to be responsible and to act in a responsible way, not just as proclaiming some principles and then letting people go in any way. And in the same way as democracy is not just voting, it's creating a democratic society and a democratic mentality. And I liked what this gentleman said now, that peace and stability is the fruit of prosperity. But to do that is, the way is to create prosperity. And well, whether the capitalist or communist systems are a better way, that's something to be discussed, maybe by now. But, and especially in the reform of the United Nations, which is necessary, I think that there are many things to be done in the other aspects to create the conditions for stability. In the, as Minister Ana Palacio said, in the Bretton Woods institutions, to make it more equilibrated. In many other of the bodies of the United Nations, it is not only the Security Council.
That's
this
right.
is not this is the point I want to mention.
Absolutely.
We have to reform throughout many other different things without which we cannot create the conditions for prosperity, for stability, etc. It's not that simple, and we have to work on that.
Well said indeed. Go ahead, please. All the way, the last couple of ones, and then we're going to come to the panel.
Hi.
And please be brief.
Yes, my name is Pedro. I'm a director at the Brazilian Center for International Relations and one of the emerging leaders with the Atlantic Dialogues. I want your comments on the following, piggybacking on what a former Minister Castaneda has asked, dear former professor of mine. So be careful what you wish for. Yes, there was a chance that Bolsonaro and Modi would have been at the UN Security Council if the agenda they had were on. But there is an even greater likelihood that we're going to have to unfortunately count on Donald Trump back at the UN Security Council in 2025. Yet, I don't see that kind of questioning about the legitimacy of the United States seat at the UN Security Council. So just on that context, I would like to ask for your comments on how does it feel with the likelihood of Donald Trump going back to the UN Security Council in 2025?
All right. Thank you. Last question. Go ahead.
My name is Michael Stopford, and this is about the UN, and it will have a specific question for you all. We've all talked about the UN a lot. I was 20 years with the UN, and I worked a lot on communications, and Mr. Diop, you talked about, you know, we the peoples versus we the member states of the UN. That's been the dichotomy, obviously, since the very beginning of the UN. Mr. Castaneda, Minister Castaneda, you said be careful what you wish for. Our friend Dennis from Cameroon at lunch said, well, we're in a post-UN world. I've been teaching in our university here, and my students say when we talk about the UN at the end of the course that they're even more disheartened than they were at the beginning because of the sense of powerlessness of the UN that we face. So the simple question really is there any chance of any institutional changes that would really make a difference, or are we condemned to wait for a time when there's a greater sense of shared interest?
Thank you. A question actually that has been raised and posed here on this very panel. We'll try again. We'll try again. Now, obviously, I don't expect you to address each and every one of them, but the sentiment, however, I think that we've gotten from the Q&A and from the comments is, overall, the audience thought that perhaps the debate here, or rather the remarks and the assessment of the current situation that we find ourselves in, may be a bit too optimistic. So let's start in the reverse order, General. We're going to start with you, Elizabeth, John, and Anna. You're going to get the last word. Address the questions or inputs that you feel are the most, that pertain most crucially to your field.
I humbly think that the worst mistake we could make would be to be overwhelmingly pessimistic or overwhelmingly optimistic.
I think no one is overwhelmingly optimistic.
We should be in the middle. We should be in the middle. Because life is about being in the middle. We are a very diverse humanity, don't look alike We're not the same. We don't believe in the same thing. But we have one planet, so we need to sort it out. So the key word for me is negotiation, interaction, communication, so that we can find an acceptable compromise, which will never be 100% satisfactory for each one of us. Even at the individual level, when we take our individual considerations and preoccupations, we are never 100% satisfied. And the same applies with our humanity. We cannot be naive to a point that to think that one day we will have a world whereby everybody is satisfied. It will never happen. And it's an endless process. What can be satisfactory today might not be satisfactory tomorrow. So we need to also accept the fact that this is an endless process, and we need to continue to work tirelessly on this, and be humble enough to know that we will not finish the job. The next generations will have to also play their role. That's what I believe in. And I also would like to emphasize the necessity for us, if we want to make things a little bit easier for us, is that we need to make sure that we put in place institutions that invest in fighting against inequalities and inequities, to lessen the frustration and the désamour I was talking about. Institutions that will lessen the perception we have that there is an unfair distribution of the pain, where people in majority are suffering a lot, while others are perceived as not suffering at all. And this creates divergence between us. So this is also something that is very... Multilateralism should also go with strategic partnerships, because they are mutually supportive. Strategic partnerships will give flexibility to multilateralism, so that the subsidiarity principle can be implemented and give better efficiency. We will never, and I will finish with this, be having the best result possible in this world if we are not able to very quickly make sure that the woman leadership is also empowered. Because we are suffering from a lack of woman leadership in the world. And we cannot... We
have two great ones here on this panel.
But I have this very strong conviction that we cannot be a humanity with more than 50% of our people being women and still give women minor responsibilities in the way our humanity is functioning. Thank you.
Thank you, General. Elisabeth.
Bon, mais d'abord, je crois que...
Thank you. First of all, I think that no one here has minimized the gravity of the international situation. We have two words going on amongst the most tragic. And we are in this situation where no longer believe in negotiations. We no longer want to solve the conflict through negotiations or any kind of negotiation. So because we have a generalized weakening of our democracy and an increase on the basis of growing inequalities, in other words, frustrations of populations, and even worse, very objective situations that should not exist. So what we have growing is populism. What is populism? Populism is nothing but elections without the rule of law, So we have the elections, and then what comes next is arbitrary process and the law of the jungle and the strongest. So it seems to be working, because the most desperate populations are saying, why not try in these autocrats? And, but the answers and responses never come along. In this kind of situation, the best solution would be not to continue arguing that we need institutional solutions that we cannot make, but rather continue building trust and confidence through work in common on common ground projects that are built and implemented in international organizations that are close to us. What for? To create jobs, to create security, to create wealth, understanding, mutual understanding, to really try to reach common grounds and common understanding on common values, on respect of human lives, on the capacity to listen to others, to respect others, and not just try to uniformize everything and standardize everything. This is what it takes. And in these kind of gatherings is very, very insightful, very useful. We need to try and build partnerships, new partnerships. And this is coming into place. And through this, and thanks to this, we will gradually create those solidarities. I am very mocked by the example of the EU that is highly criticized and denied because we are blamed. But listen, we have a common market of 375 million people where everyone wants to invest, everyone wants to live in the EU. And when the EU is trying to enact rules for digital revolution and digitalization, it really has an impact on the rest of the world. Of course, I'm not trying to idealize the EU. That would not be wise for me, but build concrete and tangible solidarities between partners that are close by geography, by culture, by history, and that have common interests. I don't see in the current state of the world any other solutions. And also talk about the functioning of our democracy. We cannot teach others the way they have to do democracy. And everyone has their own way to do democracy. But we cannot imagine to achieve prosperity without the rule of rules, the rule of law. What is economy about? It's about contracts. So I don't see how to dwell on this. So the issue of rule of law is absolutely paramount. And it's highly threatened today, by the way.
Absolutely. The rule of law, obviously, that's a great deal an area of your expertise, something we've talked about back in Abu Dhabi as well. But you're right, of course. Forums like the Atlantic Dialogues are extremely valuable in bringing people like you together in order to exchange ideas and spur some action. John, you took some diligent notes. I'm looking forward to your answers.
Well, Ali, I'm not a politician. I'm a diplomat and a securocrat, and so I don't expect a round of applause for telling harsh truths. I spent my career telling politicians that the world was not as simple as they thought it was, and that their solutions were not going to succeed in the way that they thought they were going to succeed. I'm a great admirer of idealism, and I share a lot of the points that my colleagues on the panel have just summed up. But we do need to realize there are some harsh realities here. The world is made up of states, and the international architecture, the international institutions we've created are designed to help these states coexist without conflict and with a degree of cooperation between them. People talk airily about peace. The natural state of the world for everything up until about 300 years ago was conflict. Peace was invented. It's not a natural state of mankind. And power comes from strength and from wealth. If you've got if the gentleman over there who was saying about equality, sorry, I think the lady over there was saying about equality. If you've got a machine gun and I don't, you've got more power than me. If the gentleman here has got $1 million and I don't, he's got more power than me. You have to have a sense of reality that when countries come together, they will strive to be more powerful, to have more military might, and to have more wealth so that they can dominate. That is the reality of the world. It's a brutal world. Now, my Belgian friend, I hope we have a chance to talk afterwards, talked about idealism and assurances of peace. The only way we can build peace and prosperity in the world is bottom up, step by step. And there is, I'm afraid, the sad reality is there is no guarantee of peace, there is no guarantee of prosperity. But there is a way in which individuals, such as those gathered here today, can work together, can cooperate together to find a gradual, staged improvement from where we are at the moment. Our friend from Cameroon was saying the UN must be reformed so that Venezuela can't invade Guyana. I'm sorry to say, if Venezuela decides to invade Guyana, it doesn't matter what happens in the Security Council in New York, Venezuela will invade Guyana. And the only way to stop it is for another country to send a military force to stop it with more power than the Venezuelan army to do that. So let's keep our aspirations grounded. Let's be realistic about the nature of power in the world, and let's try and make incremental changes and going back to the success we've all pointed to in Dubai, let's build on what we've got now and make it gradually better year by year. Thank you very much.
Thank you indeed, John, for this.
I did get a round of applause.
You did. You did. So sometimes the tough message does resonate. Anna, before you get the last word, let me just say, after the session, please remain seated because there's not going to be a break. We're going to motion and transition right into the next phase. Anna, that's got a tough act to follow. Last words.
And we are out of time. So let me be very brief. Halima, at a certain age, you realize that optimism is a willpower against a penchant for melancholy. So it's willpower. I think it's practical willpower. Dennis, because it's willpower, let's start by the first drop in the bucket. Let's start. I think that to say we do nothing because we cannot do the top, on this I'm with General Diop. Let's be realistic. I can't remember the name of the gentleman that the American U.S. that said, I mean, you know what, as Madeleine Albright coined, U.S. is still today the indispensable power. As simple as that. And we are seeing it in Ukraine, not to mention anything else. Now, I'm very interested by the gentleman that highlighted this idea of prosperity. And again, I mean, it's not poverty. Poverty, we have gone from 50% to 7%. Is inequalities or perception, the perception of inequalities in our societies. And this is a different, huge issue that is probably one of the biggest challenges that we have. But it's great. I have learned a lot. You know?
Well, I can only echo that, Ana Palacio. I have certainly learned a lot from the Darwinistic worldview of John Soros, which got a round of applause so clearly too, whether the glass is half full or empty. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I think, shockingly, we did not solve all the problems in the world within the last 75 minutes, nor were we able to come up with a new reform of the United Security Council, or for that matter. But all joke aside, I think I speak for all when I say that this discussion has been extremely thought-provoking. Thank you so much to each and every one of you. General, you said...
What did I say?
General, you prematurely started the discussion by saying we should congratulate ourselves. And I think now, 75 minutes later, I think that has certainly held true. General Biram Diop, Elizabeth Guigou, Ana Palacio, and John Soros. The future of strategic partnerships and multilateralism. It's been a fascinating debate. This is your applause. Thank you so much. I think we're going to take a quick photo.
Under the high patronage of His Majesty King Mohammed VI, the Policy Center for the New South is organizing the 12th edition of the Atlantic Dialogues Conference, its annual high-level gathering of influential public and private sector leaders from around the Atlantic Basin, for open, candid, and informal discussions on cross-regional and cross-sectoral issues. Over 350 high-level participants will gather from more than 70 countries to delve into this year's theme, A More Assertive Atlantic, Its Meaning for the World. Same as every edition, the conference will allow for different session formats. Over 10 plenary sessions and 3 AD talks will be on the record, available for streaming on the Policy Center's website. 2 night owl sessions and over 15 thematic breakout dinners will be held in more intimate settings around the city of Marrakesh for off-the-record, frank, and uninhibited discussions. South-South